Movie-to-game translations have this reputation of, oh, what's the eloquent way of putting it? Sucking hard? Yeah, that would be a good way of putting it. The reason? Well, pressure from publishers demand that the game's release coincide with the movies. The studios know that the license is going to sell itself, so the priority shifts from making a game great to making a game quick. Needless to say, many necessitated design shortcuts often leave you with a product that at best feels rough around the edges, and at worst incomplete. The obvious historical example is, of course, E.T. The notorious Atari 2600 cart was rushed to market in barely 6 weeks in order to ship for the holiday rush, and despite earning its bad rap as one of the worst video games of all time, it also happened to be one of the best-selling titles for 1983. History has therefore provided a very small camp of games that actually play like the movies they're inspired by. But could EA publish a respectable title to join the ranks of classics like Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, or Aladdin on the Super Nintendo and Genesis, or, of course, GoldenEye? Could developer Stormfront Studios relive the silver screen spectacle that everyone was talking about at the time? Well, they sure did. Lord of the Rings: The Two Towers was one of the first movie tie-ins to do virtually everything right, accomplishing what few of the type ever do: translate its cinematic counterpart source material into an incredibly visceral action game. Contrary to the title, the events from the Fellowship of the Ring actually comprised the first half of the campaign. Given that the prior Fellowship game, a lackluster open-ended adventure, didn't rank so well with the critics, that was probably for the best. Beginning as the infamous Isildur bearing the brunt of the Dark Lord Sauron's orcish armies in what acted as the game's tutorial, the story proceeded through the events of the first 2 chapters in J.R.R. Tolkien's legendary saga, letting you play as one of 3 characters: Aragorn, Legolas, or Gimli. But come on, no one wanted to play as Gimli. You remember him from the movies? He can't even run. Admittedly, the dwarf did seem to have the strongest attacks, and we still to this day feel inclined to use him on Balin's tomb.
Let them come. There's yet one dwarf in Moria who still draws blood.
But other than that, we tend to stick with Legolas. Apart from being a complete badass, his ranged finesse really comes in handy in the later stages when things start to heat up in the deep. Speaking of which, there was a lot more longevity in Two Towers than its length would have you believe. Most of the levels were really short. I mean really short, some embarrassingly so. One quote-unquote level literally consists of one boss. That's it, no joke. You can get through the game in a single sitting, assuming frustration doesn't get the best of you in the final tiers. The levels were also linear, the camera's fixed and drives you along one set path. But there were a few factors keeping you from tossing towers in the trash. For one thing, this wasn't a button masher. An RPG element meshed with the action, upgrading your characters with crazy combos and racking up high scores, both major components of the gameplay. For another thing, what we would call a horde mode today became unlocked once you beat the game. You face off against wave after wave of Saruman's Isengard forces. And then on top of that, you got tons of great bonus material, interviews, and all that. But all that aside, boredom wasn't much of a concern anyways, because the action here was so damn good that you'd find yourself replaying the game at least half a dozen times. Dissimilar to Fellowship, The Two Towers was just about the epic hack-and-slash action, and right it should be. All the battles from the film, or most of them, from the Mines of Moria to the Plains of Rohan to the epic climax at Helm's Deep, were recreated as well as to stand with the finest in the sword-swinging genre. A diverse set of moves always kept the action fluid and never made it feel like a button masher. You had a quick attack, a strong strike to take out shielded enemies, a parry move to block foes' blows, and a finisher that skewered orcs knocked to the ground. Throw in ranged attacks and unlockable combos that could dispatch waves of orcs and Uruk-hai in a myriad of methods, and what you had was some decidedly strategic and versatile combat. And each character's attacks felt like they should, the speed of Legolas providing a very different play experience from the all-around swordsmanship of Aragorn. The key here was that you actually felt like you were those characters. I mean, forgetting the Lord of the Rings license for a second, this was just one of the greatest examples of third-person combat ever, period. But movie-to-game adaptations are called so for a reason. They're not just about delivering the gameplay goods. They're about turning a passive experience into an interactive one. The Two Towers not only pulled that feat off, but it went a step further and integrated film and fun flawlessly, rather than just convert one to the other. It was one of the first games I can remember, apart from other notable cinematic games like Grand Theft Auto 3, to start the game right away without even taking you to a menu. Footage from the movie plays, setting the scene, and then a shot cuts away to the same shot, only computer generated, and there you go, you're hacking away at armies of orcs. It was a revolutionary device to just turn on the machine, go to grab a beer from the fridge, and come back to find yourself getting your ass handed to you as the game had immediately thrust you into the fray of shattered shields. It was around this time in gaming that we began to notice a greater emphasis on storytelling and movie-like quality in games, but we'll leave that discussion for another time. What we're saying here is that such a heavy reliance on movie material and the awesome transition effects from stock to CG made watching the movie as much a part of the game as playing it, and that's what this is about. That's what the movie tie-in is supposed to be. Again, by no means had it succeeded in all other facets. Two Towers certainly had its defects. One of the biggest problems we have with the game is that it's as much a jump-out experience as a jump-in experience. This is a hard game. Clearly, the guys behind it felt that the short levels should be compensated by steep difficulty. The challenge is welcome by all means, but the brevity of each mission here meant fewer checkpoints. You'd die at the end of a long-winded battle, fail to defend a barred gate, or allow innocents to be slaughtered, and a 10-minute trek was immediately undone. Too frustrated to even fathom restarting and soldiering on, you shut off the machine and would probably itch for another craving in the next hour or so. Rinse, repeat, i.e. frustration, and by association another F word was Two Towers' fatal fault. If recent years have proven anything when it comes to movie-based games, it's the following. It's far more productive and profitable to give a developer liberty with a franchise, even if that means producing a universe and storyline that barely resembles the film. The Chronicles of Riddick Escape from Butcher Bay and Batman Arkham City are the ones to come to mind with regards to that tactic. The former, lo and behold, turned out to be better than the Chronicles of Riddick film, while Arkham, despite still capitalizing on the Dark Knight's popularity, explored the series' animated universe instead of just reproducing the reality of Chris Nolan's gritty reimagining. In both cases, the games probably helped to sell DVDs, and hey, they didn't suck. Bonus points. Perhaps this is an emerging trend to watch out for. Regardless, that's not the point here. The point is that Towers did not fall into that increasingly inclined category. It was just one more movie-to-game adaptation that, at an initial glance, you could only assume was another haphazard stab at giving the gamer a decent derision of the tried and true. EA and Stormfront certainly derived the hack-and-slash basics, but the way they utilized the Lord of the Rings license and bled the boundaries between mediums was virtually unprecedented. You felt like you were playing the movie, and that was the goal, that was the ultimate objective, that the cinematic experience was recreated in your own interactive terms. The one to rule them all, dust off this classic when you get the chance, and return to one of the kings of movie tie-ins.